just a template that you should use as a starting point. Depending on what size you're at, how much body fat you have to lose, how much weight you have to lose, that is going to dictate whether or not you want to stick to these parameters or whether or not you need to modify them. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to lose weight without counting calories. But before I start, you guys know the drill. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, ding ding ding. And if you don't want to watch the entire video, I will be including timestamps in the description section so you guys can skip ahead to the section that you want. Now onto the topic at hand. When it comes down to weight loss, a lot of people tend to overemphasize the importance of calories and counting calories. And the truth is, while calories do matter, you can absolutely lose weight without having to count calories. And one of the ways that you could do that is the way that I'm going to teach you today. But before I get into that, I would just like to preface this by saying that, again, calories do matter, and if your main objective is to lose weight, you do need to be in a caloric deficit. At the end of the day, if you're in a caloric deficit, you will lose weight. If you are in a caloric surplus, you are going to gain weight. And if the amount of calories that you take in is equal to that of your total daily energy expenditure, then your weight is going to stay exactly the same. But just because calories do matter, it does not mean that you have to count calories. And by not counting calories, it's going to make it a lot easier for most people. Now, one of the things with the method that I'm going to be teaching you for today is it's a little bit generic in terms of nutritional requirements. So at the end of the video, I am going to be teaching you how to modify it based off of your different dietary approach, whether you are following something like Paleo, Keto, Carnivore, Vegetarian, or Vegan. So if you want to skip ahead to that, go ahead and look in the timestamps and you can skip ahead to whatever particular diet you're on. But right now, I'm going to get into exactly how this method works and where exactly I learned it from. This method over here, I learned from John Berardi and Precision Nutrition. I began my career over 16 years ago, and when I first started, I would see a lot of weight loss patients. I don't really see too many people for weight loss now. Most of the people that I see now are either professional athletes or people with medical conditions that are trying to improve their health. But for the first 5 or 6 years of my career, most of my patients were weight loss patients, and I found that when I placed an overemphasis on calories, it was not sustainable for those types of people, and they just were not able to properly track their calories. Whereas when I utilized this method that I'm going to teach you right now, it led to much greater client adherence, and my results in terms of my client results improved through the roof. So this is a much more practical application of weight loss than just counting calories. And the way that it works is you are going to use your hand as your serving size. In terms of the different macronutrients, when it comes to protein-dense foods, one serving size is going to be equal to that of your palm. So whatever the size of your palm is, that is going to be one serving of protein-dense foods. When it comes to vegetables, so your non-starchy carbohydrates, one fistful is going to be equivalent to one serving of vegetables. And that is going to be something like a fistful of broccoli, cauliflower, any type of non-starchy vegetable. That is going to be one serving. Next, it's going to be starchy carbohydrates. When it comes to starchy carbohydrates like millet, teff, amaranth, quinoa, rice, all of those grains, then 1 cupped handful is going to be equal to one serving size. Whatever you can fit in the cup of one of your hands, that is going to be one serving of carbohydrates. And finally, that brings us to fats. When it comes to fats, you are going to use your thumb as your guide. So one thumb, whatever the size of your thumb is, that is going to be equal to one serving of fat. Now, in terms of how exactly your hand portion is going to equate to the different macronutrient conversions, you could think of 1 palm of protein as 20 to 30 grams of protein. These guidelines that I'm going to be listing now, these are all from Precision Nutrition, but 1 palm of protein is going to be roughly 20 to 30 grams of protein. And in terms of how much that is going to be, it's going to be equal to roughly 3 to 4 ounces of cooked meat. Now, for myself, I know that my palm size, the burgers that I have these chopped sirloin burgers, and they come in 5-ounce patties. So 5 ounces is roughly the size of my palm, maybe a little bit bigger. So that 3 to 4 ounces, depending on the size of your hand, is about what you can expect. If you are a woman, probably closer to 3. If you're a man, the average man, probably closer to 4. But it's gonna be within that 3 to 4 ounce range of cooked meat. In terms of non-meat protein items, things like eggs, well, you can't really use your palm to count eggs. So for eggs, 2 eggs is going to be the equivalent of 1 serving, because if you were to flatten out a couple of eggs, it would roughly be the size of your palm. And then lastly, when it comes to more yogurt type items, things like Greek yogurt, then 1 cup of Greek yogurt is going to be equivalent to roughly 1 serving, which would be the cup of your hand. But that's how you could think of it. 1 palm is going to be your serving of protein-dense foods. It's going to be equal to roughly 20 to 30 grams of protein, and that's going to look like roughly 3 to 4 ounces of cooked meat, 2 eggs, or 1 cup of yogurt. Next, we get into vegetables. When it comes to vegetables, 1 fist worth of vegetables is going to be pretty low in terms of how many carbohydrates you're going to get from that, so I'm not even going to bother telling you how many carbohydrates are in that. However, in terms of what it would equate to in terms of the actual vegetables that you're consuming, it would be roughly 1 cup of non-starchy vegetables. So that would be 1 cup of baby spinach, 1 cup of broccoli, 1 cup of cauliflower, whatever vegetable you're into, it's 1 cup of that vegetable. When it comes to fats, 1 thumb of fat is roughly going to be equal to 7 to 12 grams of fat. And in terms of what's that going to look like, that is going to be roughly 1 tablespoon of oil, nuts, seeds, nut butter, cheeses, butter, all that type of stuff. So you can think of 1 thumb as 1 tablespoon of any of those types of products. Now that we know how exactly your hand is going to convert in terms of the macronutrients, what exactly are the suggestions when it comes to meal servings? Well, according to Precision Nutrition, every single meal should contain 1 to 2 servings of each of the things that I just listed. So each meal should contain 1 to 2 servings of protein, 1 to 2 servings of vegetables, 1 to 2 servings of carbohydrates, and 1 to 2 servings of fats. And that is going to be what each of your meals should be comprised of. I'm going to get into this a little bit later, but you don't want to follow that too strictly. Depending on how many meals you consume and the size of the individual, you can modify this, but that's a good baseline. And in terms of how many servings you should be consuming throughout the duration of the entire day, for a moderately active man, Precision Nutrition recommends anywhere from 6 to 8 servings of each of the macronutrients that I listed. So that would be 6 to 8 servings throughout the day of protein, 6 to 8 servings throughout the day of vegetables, 6 to 8 servings throughout the day of carbohydrates, specifically your starchy carbohydrates, and 6 to 8 servings throughout the day of your fats. That's for moderately active men. What about for moderately active women? Well, for moderately active women, Precision Nutrition recommends 4 to 6 total servings throughout the day of each of those macronutrients. So that's 4 to 6 protein, 4 to 6 servings of vegetables, 4 to 6 servings of carbohydrates, and 4 to 6 servings of fats. Now, one very important thing worth noting when it comes to these different suggestions and serving sizes is that this is just a template that you should use as a starting point. Depending on what size you're at, how much body fat you have to lose, how much weight you have to lose, that is going to dictate whether or not you want to stick to these parameters or whether or not you need to modify them. Because you're not counting calories, we need some other form of a metric to be able to determine whether or not this approach is working. So if your main objective is losing weight, the metric that we are going to use is the scale. What is the number on the scale? When it comes down to the number on the scale, if you see that your weight is going up, then you need to reduce the total number of servings that you're consuming throughout the day. If you see that your weight is staying exactly the same, then again, you need to reduce the total number of servings that you're consuming throughout the day. If you hop on the scale and you notice that your weight is going down, then keep doing what you're doing because whatever servings you are incorporating is clearly working for you because you're losing weight. If it wasn't working, you wouldn't be losing weight. But you need to modify it if it's not working for you. And I'm going to teach you how exactly you can modify it in just a little bit. But before I get into that, I just want to get into some of the benefits of using this method. One of the huge benefits to using this method is that it is terrific for the average person who has a lot of weight to lose. If you are somebody who is morbidly obese, let's say you are 500 or 600 pounds, using your hand and these serving sizes as a suggestion for what you should consume is going to definitely give you results because for you to overconsume on these recommendations at 500 to 600 pounds would almost be impossible. So if you are using your hand as your serving size guide and you're following the 6 to 8 or 4 to 6 servings per day as recommended by Precision Nutrition, the chances of you gaining weight if you're 500 to 600 pounds is almost impossible. I don't even think it is possible for you to gain weight if you follow those guidelines exactly to the T. And just a few other reasons why this method is incredibly effective is, first of all, your hands are portable. You can take your hands wherever you go. It's not like with counting calories where you have to take a scale everywhere, because if you are trying to track calories, at the end of the day, you need a scale because you can't trust what the label says on food labels. A lot of times, they will underestimate the amount of calories that are in the food. So you may think you are consuming 120 calories of a particular food item, but a lot of times there are food labels that will underestimate by 50%. So whatever you're consuming is actually 50% more than whatever it says on the label. So you may think you're only consuming 120 calories, but it could be 180 calories. So by using your hand, you don't have to bring a scale, and that's one of the huge benefits to using this method. Another benefit to this method is that your hands are a consistent size. Even as you start to lose weight, your hands really aren't going to change that much. So in terms of your serving sizes, using your hand as your serving size is going to be consistent throughout your weight loss journey. And as your weight comes down and you start to see that maybe you hit a plateau, all you have to do is just reduce the number of total servings throughout the day. But you can still use your hands as your metric. And then finally, one of the last things that's going to be really good about this method is that your hands are going to be to scale to the individual. This is a general rule. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions. You're going to have some really large people with really small hands and really small people with really large hands. But as a general rule, your hands are going to be relative to your size of your body. So if you are somebody who is 7 feet tall and you are just a huge individual, your requirements in terms of nutrition is going to be higher than that of somebody who is maybe 4 feet tall with very, very small hands. So by using your hands as your guide, it is going to be very consistent with the size of your frame. Again, though, this is just a general rule. If you are one of those outliers who's very, very big with very small hands or very, very small with very, very big hands, then this method isn't going to be ideal. You can still use this, but you're going to have to modify it a little bit by either adding more servings if you have really tiny hands or reducing the number of servings if you have really, really large hands. But that's it. On to the drawbacks now. There are a few drawbacks. This isn't a perfect model. Some of the few drawbacks is that, one, this is not going to be ideal for professional athletes or people who have very little weight to lose. If you are a professional athlete, your main objective is not weight loss. Your main objective is performance. So if your main objective is performance, you shouldn't really be focused on calories or losing weight. When it comes to people that have very little weight to lose, even though it is your goal to lose weight, as you get closer and closer to your goal, you're going to have to find that the servings are going to be minimized a little bit more. You can start out with those recommendations of 1 to 2 servings per meal and 6 to 8 servings throughout the day if you're a man, 4 to 6 if you're a woman. However, once you get closer to your goal weight, some people may need to drop the servings down a little bit as they approach their goal because their caloric requirements are going to decrease. As you start to lose weight, your total daily energy expenditure is generally going to be lower because you're not as heavy, so you're not moving around as much weight throughout the duration of the day. However, you can still use this method even if you are close to your goal weight. You're just going to have to modify it a little bit, and I'm going to teach you that a little later. Another drawback to this method is that it's not ideal for people that have very specific caloric or macronutrient requirements. Let's say you are somebody who has a very specific number of calories that you need to consume. Let's say you want to enter a bodybuilding competition and you need to hit a very specific number of calories. Well, this method is not going to be ideal for that type of individual. And the same can be said for people that have very specific macronutrient requirements. If you have to hit specific macros, let's say you are on a keto diet and you need to hit less than 5% carbs, more than 70% fat, and about 25% protein. Well, in order to do that, you're going to have to get very specific with the foods that you eat. You can still use this method, but it's going to make it much more difficult, and it's not going to be the best method if you are following that type of a diet. But aside from those, if you're not a professional athlete, you're not really close to your goal weight, and you don't have a very specific number of calories or macronutrients that you have to hit, then it's going to be ideal for you because of the reasons that I stated earlier. And one of the final reasons why this is not the greatest method is that it doesn't account for people with very specific dietary restrictions. Let's say you are somebody who's on a keto diet or a carnivore diet or a paleo diet. Well, on all 3 of those diets, you're not supposed to be consuming grains. So if you are using this method, you are going to have to find a way to swap out the serving sizes of grains for some type of other thing. And that is what I'm going to get into right now. The last thing that I'm going to do is teach you how exactly to use this method and modify it based off of the meal that you are eating based off of your own dietary restrictions. So the first thing I want to do is the paleo diet. Let's say you are following the paleo diet. The paleo diet, for those of you who do not know, is basically the hunter-gatherer diet or caveman diet, and you're essentially only eating things that were around before the industrial age. So before we had the ability to mill grains and do all of these different types of things, we didn't have grains, we didn't have processed foods. If we did have grains, they were fermented, it wasn't processed grains. So the concept behind the paleo diet is essentially you're eating meats, nuts, seeds, vegetables, and that's pretty much it. Now, when it comes to the paleo diet, because you are not consuming carbohydrates in terms of starchy carbohydrates, you need to find a way to replace those servings and replace it for other foods. So if you are on a paleo diet, one of the things that you could do is swap out the servings of starchy carbohydrates and replace it for a serving of either proteins, vegetables, or fats. In terms of which one you should change it for, it's going to come down to personal preference. You can try swapping out a serving of carbohydrates for fat, see how that makes you feel. Try swapping out a serving of carbohydrates for protein-dense foods, see how that makes you feel. And then you could also try swapping it out for vegetables and see how that makes you feel. Go with whichever one makes you feel your best. When it comes to the keto diet, this one's going to be even more strict than the paleo diet. The thing with the keto diet is you do have to consume a lot more fat than you would consume on a paleo diet, and you're also minimizing your carbohydrates a lot more. You are hitting a threshold of no more than 5% of your total daily calories. So if you are on a keto diet, again, you're gonna have to modify your carbohydrate servings. So one thing that you could do for this is for every one serving of starchy carbohydrates, so every cupped handful of starchy carbohydrates, you would replace that one cupped handful with two servings, so that's 2 thumbs worth of fat. Because on a keto diet, it is a higher fat diet, so you wouldn't want to replace it with protein and fat, because if you consume a lot of protein, that can kick you out of ketosis. So instead of consuming high protein dense foods in replace of those carbohydrates, if you are following a keto diet, for every one serving of carbohydrates, starchy carbohydrates, you would want to replace that one serving with 2 servings of fats. Next, I would like to get into modifications for somebody who is on a carnivore diet. If you're on a carnivore diet, for those of you who don't know, the carnivore diet is essentially consuming only products that come from animals. Now, because vegetables and grains are both not animal products, you would need to remove this. Unlike with the paleo and the keto diet, where we were substituting the grain servings for fats or fats and proteins, with the carnivore diet, because you are already consuming an adequate amount of protein and fat, there are a couple ways that you can modify this particular one. The first one would be just to eliminate your carbohydrate and vegetable sources. So you would still be consuming 1 to 2 servings of protein-dense foods at each meal and 1 to 2 servings of fat-dense foods at each meal. However, you can also swap in some extra stuff. So let's say you eliminate the carbohydrates and you eliminate the vegetables. Well, if you find that just eating the protein by itself is not satiating enough, you can add in extra servings of protein or extra servings of fat. However, with this one, it's unnecessary to add it in. You're gonna go based off of how you feel. If you feel really energetic just on your normal servings of protein and fat, and you find that by taking out the carbohydrates and vegetables, you're able to function optimally, then you don't need to replace those servings. You can just stick with the servings that you already have. However, if you find that your energy levels are a little bit low and you're not eating enough, then you can substitute it by adding in either more protein-dense sources or more fat-dense sources. That covers it for carnivore. Next, I want to get into vegan and vegetarian. I'm going to cover vegetarian first because it's a little bit less strict. But when it comes to vegetarian, this is going to depend on the form of vegetarianism that you are on. Whether you are a very strict vegetarian, you are ovo-lacto-vegetarian, ovo-vegetarian, lacto-vegetarian, pescatarian, flexitarian, all of these different factors are going to play a role into how exactly you modify your version of the vegetarian diet. If you are incorporating things like dairy into your vegetarian diet, then your protein-dense source, that big circle right over there, because you can't consume meat, you could either swap that out for 2 eggs or a cup of yogurt, milk, any of those types of dairy sources. And in terms of your fat, you could swap out your fat sources. So let's say you are consuming something like butter, you could swap that out for something like coconut oil, olive oil, or some other type of fat that does not come from an animal. If you are a vegetarian who doesn't mind consuming things like butter, then you don't really have to worry about that. You can still consume it. But in terms of the swapping of the food items, it really comes down to the type of vegetarian diet that you are following. If you are a pescatarian, then you can still incorporate fish. So your protein-dense sources, you could still use that palm size of fish. So you're going to have to play around with it a little bit and see what exactly works for you. Now, lastly, I would like to get into the vegan diet. When it comes to the vegan diet, as with the carnivore, this is going to be the most restrictive of the different diets that I just mentioned. If you are vegan, you can't consume any animal products. So when it comes to your protein-dense sources, you're going to have to find a way to replace that. There are a couple ways that you could do this. The first way that you could do this is by swapping your protein-dense meat sources for something like either tofu or soy. However, me personally, I'm not a fan of using this method because with my clients, if I do have a client that comes to me who is vegetarian or vegan, I try to get them off of things like tofu and soy. If it's something that they really like and it's something that they really don't want to get rid of, then I'll let them have it in their diet. But if it's something where you can take it or leave it, ideally you would want to remove tofu and soy because it's heavily processed, and the closer you can get to eating all raw foods is going to be the most beneficial. So you want to eliminate as many processed foods as you can if your main objective is to lose weight and also improve your health. Now, because tofu and soy is really processed, how exactly are you going to get your protein requirements in? Well, when it comes to vegetables, grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, all of those different things, depending on the way that you mix them together, that is going to dictate exactly how much protein you get in your diet and how much bioavailable protein you are going to get. Because when it comes to grains, fats like nuts, seeds, all those types of things, and vegetables, they are considered incomplete proteins. There's this misconception about incomplete proteins, and people think that either an incomplete protein is missing certain amino acids or that incomplete proteins are a myth because every single food has every single amino acid in it. While the second one is true, technically every single food does have every single amino acid in it in terms of your carbs, vegetables, all those things. The definition of an incomplete protein is not that it is completely missing every single amino acid or one or more amino acid. The definition of an incomplete protein is that it has all of the essential amino acids. However, at least one of the amino acids is not found in that particular product in the correct ratio or in an adequate amount. That is key. It is not in the product in an adequate amount. So even though you may have a vegetable or grain that has a certain amount of a specific amino acid, if it's not in the correct proportion, it is going to be considered an incomplete amino acid. So one way that you can combine foods to make sure that you're getting an adequate amount of protein, and that's complete proteins, is by combining things like nuts with grains or vegetables with grains. You want to combine all of these different types of foods together. So if you can get a nice combination of grains, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, all of those great things, then what's going to happen is you're going to get a complete protein. One of the other things with complete proteins are, even though I just mentioned food combining, you don't need to combine food at every single meal and have a complete protein at every single meal. As long as you are combining your food sources throughout the day and you're getting an adequate amount of each different food source, then you will have enough protein throughout the day without having to food combine at every single meal. As an example, one of the classic ideas of food combining is a peanut butter sandwich, because when you take peanuts, which is a legume, and you combine it with bread, which is a grain, well, when you combine legumes and grains, you form a complete protein. Now, if you consume a peanut butter sandwich, you are getting a complete protein in one meal. However, if you consume bread for breakfast and then you consume peanut butter for lunch, you're still getting a complete protein throughout the duration of the day. Even though it's not a complete protein at one meal, over the course of the day, your body is going to utilize all the different amino acids that you put into your body throughout the day. So you can either combine your foods at every single meal or just make sure that you're getting a wide variety of different foods throughout the duration of the entire day. Those are just a few of the ways that you can incorporate using your hand and the method utilized by Precision Nutrition to help you lose weight without counting calories. And just as a quick recap, your hand, that's going to be one protein source. So whatever your palm size is, that's a protein source. Vegetable source is one fist. A cupped handful is vegetables. Your thumb is going to be one serving of fat. In terms of how much you need, you're going to need anywhere from 1 to 2 servings of each of the macronutrients at each meal. That's going to equate to 6 to 8 throughout the day for a man, 4 to 6 for a woman. If you find that your weight is stalling, what you're going to have to do is lower the amount of total servings that you're having throughout the day. So let's say you are a man who, between your proteins, vegetables, carbohydrates, and fat, you are consuming 24 servings throughout the day and you hit a plateau. Well, you're going to have to remove at least 1 serving from one of the different sources. So you could remove 1 serving of protein, 1 serving of vegetables, 1 serving of grains, or 1 serving of fats. But once you see that you start to hit a plateau, minimize your total daily servings by 1. Go on the scale. If you find that your weight is still the same, lower it another 1. If you find that by reducing it again, your weight goes down, then stick with that until you hit another plateau. Once you hit another plateau, then you're going to have to start minimizing your servings. And in terms of the macronutrient composition of your diet, you can play around with these different macronutrients. You can swap out vegetables for proteins, you could swap out carbohydrates for fats, Play around with everything, see what exactly works for you. But the main takeaway is you can absolutely lose weight without counting calories as long as you use your hands as your serving size. That's pretty much it for today's video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to smash that like button so I know to make more of these types of videos in the future. And if you're either new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, as I will be uploading new videos every single day. That's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again tomorrow.